to the Academic Skills Marathon series organized by Kashf Initiative in collaboration with Bahujan scholars. Thank you all for joining today's session on Introduction to Research Methods in the Social Science, a foundational session for anyone interested in conducting rigorous academic research. I am Prabhakar and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce the two initiatives behind this series. Bahujan Scholars is a non-profit registered in the US. It's a network of graduate students, faculty, and professionals outside India. The network's purpose is to support scholars from Bahujan communities, build networks, provide mentorship, such as groups and personal mentoring, and organize online events on academic and professional development topics. On the other hand, Kashf Initiative began through a conversation and academic journey of students from South Asia who realized that many of the foundational skills in the social sciences and humanities, such as reading critically, thinking methodologically, academic writing, etc., are often assumed rather than explicitly taught. We wanted to create a space where students and researchers could learn from one another, share their experiences and learning, and make academic journey more meaningful and little less isolating. We also recognize that these gaps are often more pronounced for students outside metropolitan centers and for those from historically marginalized backgrounds. With this in mind, we have organized monthly sessions, a range of workshop and training sessions on research methods, literature review, academic writing, referencing, and related topics, as well as sessions in regional languages in an effort to bridge language barriers to make this academic conversation more accessible. So for more information on this initiative, you can visit the respective websites mentioned in the chat box, which I will also share in the chat box the link. So we'll start the session. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's session, Dr. Chitran D, a historian and assistant professor and a researcher whose work explores the interaction of caste, law, and colonialism in 19th century Malabar. Dr. Chitran completed his PhD in history and his doctoral research examined the interaction between colonial legal and penal system and the institutions of caste. His work has been presented at the leading academic forums, including the Indian History Congress, the South Indian History Congress, and the World Foucault Congress. And he has published on the themes of caste, colonial law, legal history, and social exclusion. He is also an active member of both the Indian History Congress and the South Indian History Congress. Given his experience in historical research and academic scholarship, we are delighted to have him lead today's session on Introduction to Research Methods in the Social Sciences. Please welcome Dr. Chitran.
Thank you so much, Prabhakar.
Over to you, Chitran. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhakar. So, Vidushi, can you share the slide? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just a minute.
Okay, Vidushi.
Yeah.
Okay. So, shall I start?
Absolutely, yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So thank you, Prabhakar and Vidushi, for inviting me for this lecture series, Introduction to Research Methods in the Social Sciences. I feel very much privileged and honored to be speaking in this forum again for the second time. And I don't know whether I'm that much qualified to speak on this topic because, as I told Vidushi, research method is something that is very tricky. When research method is also connected. So basically, I would say that when I prepared this PPT, I learned a lot, in fact, because when we do research, because as Prabhakar mentioned, I have a history background. So when we do research in central universities and all, we have this methodology class that happens because I did in Hyderabad University. So we have this methodology course as part of the coursework. But then we don't exactly practice that. It's just the practical dimension was sometimes lacking. And when I was preparing for this slide, what happened is I could reflect upon my own research that I did during my PhD. I could unlearn so many things that were there during my PhD, because I would honestly admit that even though I might be hardworking, I'm not a very disciplined person when it comes to organizing things, and when it comes to research methods, it's all about organization, it's all about discipline, This is the thing that I observed after making this slide. And in fact, I would say that this preparation actually helped me to work on my own work that I'm currently pursuing. Like, I'm currently working on something, some article. So when I was actually preparing these slides, this helped me in actually reflecting on my own work, what I'm currently doing, what are the pitfalls that are there in the work that I'm currently doing. So in that way, I would say that it was very, very beneficial. So can you move to the next slide, Vidushi? Possible? Yeah. Hello? 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 Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah,
Vidushi,
yeah. I think Vidushi is
some
or
problem with her connection. I'll just
I
call
think
her.
so.
No issue.
Yeah. Or should I share my screen?
You can do that.
Okay, fine.
I think she's reconnecting.
Okay, sure.
Some signal issue.
Okay, right.
Can you try sharing your screen?
Yeah, I will try sharing my slide as well. Okay, I think it's visible now, right?
Yes, it is visible.
Yes.
Thank you.
So can I continue then?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, I will start my presentation. So basically, before going into the methods of social sciences or the introduction to methods of social sciences, we actually need to know what constitutes social science research. That is a very important and fundamental question, right? Many of you in the audience might be aware of this is a very basic and fundamental question that we are doing. What is the nature of social science research? So, why I thought of bringing this idea, and in fact, for this presentation, I had referred to some books that are related to social science research, the methods of social science research. I referred to some books, and based on those references only, I made these slides. And actually, the thing is, what constitutes social science? This is very basic because you're studying about society. And in fact, here they have mentioned various disciplines. Many of you will be from different disciplines. Sociology is there, human geography, social policy, politics, criminology, and of course, I have not included history, which is my discipline. That is obviously there. And in fact, it is about studying the society from an academic perspective, from a research perspective. So obviously there is scientific research and there is social science research. So basically you are actually researching and making the society more complex, understanding the society in a very complex way, right? So that is the beginning of social science research, and that is how these subjects such as sociology, human geography, social policy, etc., are being constituted. So in that way, you are forming, various research topics on these subjects. In fact, social.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Chitran, sorry to cut you off. I'm so sorry, my
Sure.
network got bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just asking you to stop a bit because somebody has annotated on your PT. So I think I'll share your again
Okay, so I
because
stopped sharing my slide actually.
I'll share your mine. And
Sure, definitely.
thank you
No
so much for
problem, no
managing
problem.
it.
No
I
problem,
don't know
no
if you have.
problem. No problem. Yes. Yeah, I think you can go to the third slide, I guess.
Is this okay?
This is fine. Can you move to the third slide?
I have
We reached there. Yeah.
moved to the third slide. Is it visible
Okay,
now?
but
Components of
it's
social science research.
but it's not
It's
visible
not
actually.
visible to us, the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
It's okay. No problem.
Um,
Yes.
Okay.
You can go to the next one. Yes. This is fine. So social science. Yeah. No, the previous one. You can go to the previous one actually.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yes. Sorry.
No, you shouldn't be sorry. It's just
Yeah. But
it's
anyway,
from
leave that. No. Yeah. This is also fine. No problem. I can tell from the slide. So basically, you can start from here. No problem. So basically, social science is a very complex subject in that sense, because unlike science, we don't have this idea of objectivity. Social science is all about subjectivity, because you're studying about human beings, and human beings themselves are very complex. Human beings are very complex, and they're not definitive. Like, there's nothing like definite about human beings. You are kind of conditioned by your social norms, your social position, your political position, your gender position, your sexual orientation. So many factors constitute human beings, and the irony is that human beings are working on human beings. So the researchers themselves, they are also very complex. So like, I have a particular social position, political position, cultural position, caste position, gender position. So many things as a researcher I am having, and I am studying about human beings who are very complex. So in that sense, social science is considered to be like one of the most, when you do research in social science, it's very complex. It's not that simple to do social science research. And in that sense, in the course of this presentation also, I'll be touching upon these aspects of ethics and sampling methods, all these things, because all are very much connected in that sense, right? So now we'll go to this idea of components of social science research. So I just thought of, this is from various reference books that I got this information. So basically, these are very basic things that you plan for your research. You do literature review, the nature of data that you're using, and sampling. So sampling is something which we'll be speaking about, because I come from history background, and in history we never do sampling. So we mostly go for, because I do on modern Indian history, so we mostly go for archival work, right? I mean, and people who do ancient Indian history, they'll go for inscriptions or coins, like that. So we generally don't do sampling. But then in other social science disciplines such as sociology, economics, anthropology, and all, sampling is like a very important component. So in fact, we were in fact never taught about sampling per se as history scholars. So in that sense, this was also a learning for me, and I have certain pitfalls. I have certain concerns about how sampling is considered, or how sampling is conceived in social sciences. We'll come to that. Then, of course, data is a very important component, collecting data, analyzing the data, the ethics of the researcher. That's what we discussed, the ethics. The ethical position that the researcher is taking is very, very important, very crucial, very tricky as well. And then writing up the research, the final publication part, right? So can you go to the next slide, please? Yes. So I have taken the liberty of using AI tools also for this presentation. So I had asked my friend Dr. Srikala also, can I use AI tools for this presentation? So she said, yeah, you can use it, so that it can connect with the participants as well, I hope. So basically, this is like an AI tool that I generated about the research process, like choosing a topic, narrowing the focus. Like for instance, I work on colonial criminal law, the criminal law that was there during the colonial period. So, colonial criminal law in a particular region, how the colonial criminal law is impacting various marginalized castes and communities. So here I'm just giving my own experiences as a researcher, so that it can connect with the audience, I hope. So there is a narrowing down that I'm trying to do here, because if you see legality, it's a very broad topic. Within that, there is criminal law, which is more specific, and then you're going back to history, not current scenario, so that is also getting narrowed down. And then you're working on a region, that is also a narrowing down process. Then you're working on particular castes and communities, that narrowing down process. So basically, the idea of research, the idea of choosing a topic is more about narrowing down as much as possible. so that you actually can connect. And of course, the idea of reviewing the literature, which is very, very significant part. In fact, there is a difference between review and summary, very different understandings of reviewing and summary. I'll go to that in the next slides. Formulating the problem. So the gap that you're trying to address, like maybe in the literature, you're reading the various literature connected to that particular topic that you're choosing, and you're finding out a loophole in the existing literature, a problem in the existing literature, a gap. For instance, in my area, I can tell that, when I worked on criminal law, the existing literature on criminal law, especially colonial criminal law, they have not prominently addressed the caste and community question. So that is why I tried to make that intervention. So this is a gap that is there. So in that gap, I am trying to place myself as a researcher. So then you are developing a research question. This is something that is very important because, as I told you, I am also currently working on an article. And when I was writing that article, I was just reading so much, and I was using those readings. I had a strong gap in the existing literature, but I was not able to formulate the research question. So when I was preparing for this presentation only, I understood that it is very significant that you should have a very concise and precise research question. So you should frame your problem into a question. So that also is a skill, that also is an art, which I am also trying to learn in this process actually. So that is very, very important and crucial, that you should be able to ask question out of this gap. And that is a skill, that is an art. And I think it requires a separate lecture also for that. And basically you're trying to answer this question, and you're basically planning the research in a disciplined way, in a more organized way. You're planning the methods, the data that you need to collect, and you're going for the field, whatever field it is, be it on the ground, be it archives or anywhere, and you are actually gathering the data. And the next step is that you are analyzing the data and interpreting the data. So analysis and interpretation, both are very, very different kind of phenomena. So analysis means, according to my understanding, it's more like a patterns that you are seeing in your study, right? Some patterns, common patterns that you're seeing. You're arranging the data, and you're seeing certain patterns in the research that you're doing. Like for instance, in my study, I can tell that I had worked on the idea of death penalty, like how death penalty is impacting the various marginalized castes and communities under colonial rule of law. So during the second half of the 19th century, we see that many of the marginalized castes and communities are being inflicted with death penalty. So you see a pattern there. So I'm basically forming an analysis there. And interpretation is more like the main argument that you are trying to push forward. What is the larger argument that you are forming after the research, right? And basically you're communicating the findings. So this is like a step-by-step process that ideally you should do when you do a research. There might be various institutional constraints and all, but then this is the ideal step in which we actually reach the conclusion, right? So in that sense, it's a very organized kind of process. So can you move into the next slide, please?
Just a second,
Yes.
Chitran. Can I ask
Yes,
you
sir.
one favor? Is it possible that the scholars can ask you question in between?
Sure. I mean, I would encourage that they can even interrupt me and ask.
So we have one question from I think it's Niranjan. He's asking, can you explain other ways to
chat
find
box,
research
right?
gaps?
It's mentioned in the chat box.
Yeah, chat box.
Can you some other ways to find research gaps? Find some other ways to find research gaps. I think what Niranjan is meaning is, are there any other ways to find research gaps? How to find research gap? Is it like that?
Niranjan, can you just unmute
Niranjan,
yourself?
You can unmute yourself, and you don't have to call me sir, by the way, okay? Yeah. Okay, I think it means, can you find some other ways to find research gaps? So basically, research gaps, I think research gaps, basically you find it automatically when you start reading. This is what my observation is, because I mean, automatically if you start reading more and more, right? I mean, basically that's the thing, Niranjan, that you're taking a particular topic and you're reading the literature extensively. That is a must actually. I mean, literature review is like a very crucial thing. because then only you can find the gap. And I'm 100% sure that whatever work, whatever interest you have, and when you start reading, it gives you that intellectual change, that you will find that, okay, somebody has not addressed something, right? So I think it's a very automatic process. It's not like you are there is no magic formula to find a research gap. I guess this is my understanding or my experience, I would say. I don't think there is like a magic formula to find a research gap. You should engage in reading. You should engage in extensive reading. Then only you will be able to find a gap, I would say. Otherwise, it's impossible to find a gap, because that is a starting process to find a gap, and you will obviously find a gap. I'm telling you from my experience, and it's a practice. It's a practice that you consistently do, I would say. So I hope I addressed Niranjan's question. So if you have further questions, please, ask me during the question answer session. I think there is.
Say that, Chitran. I think maybe there are going to be questions, but I think you can also take them towards the end, because I think there is a flow.
Sure. Definitely. I think it would be better. Yes.
If it's better for you, yeah. So please go ahead.
Sure. I think, yeah, we can go towards the end, actually. So basically, thank you for telling Niranjan this thing, because we are going into the idea of literature review. Because social scientists basically, they get interested in society, and we have our own social, cultural, political positions, in fact, because I must admit that I come from a very privileged caste and community background. And even though I come from that background, I got that exposure to study in a central university like Hyderabad Central University, wherein I got the passion towards research. Because in Hyderabad Central University, you have these various serious questions are being raised about caste, community, Ambedkarite politics. So these things are influencing you. And my own supervisor, Professor Bangya Bukya, he was a first generation learner who became who became an international scholar, a renowned scholar. So his life also inspired me, and his work, his thought processes inspired me. So in that sense, the social and political location of the researcher matters a lot in selecting a topic, reading the literature. So being a social scientist, it's a process, a cultivation, right? Your own social and political locations make you a social scientist. So in that sense, you are actually taking up a topic, you are getting interested, you are getting driven towards a topic. You think that you need to work more about this topic, and of course your current position is also determining that. Like for instance, because my topic, for instance, related to colonial criminal law, it is more connected to the present situation also, because in today's time you see increasing police atrocities on marginalized castes and communities in the police stations. So police atrocities are there everywhere in the legal and the penal sphere, criminal legal sphere. We see the presence of caste. So even today's context, even in the prison spaces, the marginalized communities have to clean toilets, etc. So that present concern, you are taking it up and going to the past, and you are seeing the evolution of it, and you are reading the literature connected to that, and then you are trying to find a question, that this problem which is not being addressed, and then you are using the methodology, right? So I think you can go to the next slide, Vidushi. Yes. So that is the idea of literature review. Basically, you are reading the entire. It's not possible to read the entire literature, but at least it's very important to read a substantial part of the literature to find this gap. And another thing is theory. So theory, I would say, even though this is kind of derived from certain reference books, I would say that theory is not like very mandatory. It depends on the what type of research you are doing. So theory is not like you don't have to force fit a theory. It's not mandatory that you have to force fit. You have to bring a theoretical framework. So sometimes we feel that, even including me, I have done that occasionally. That you, like for instance, Dr. Sujit, Professor Sujit sir. I mean, he was my mentor, and he had also delivered a lecture series on visual history. So he told me after my pre-submission that, because I had used the theoretical framework of a very famous French scholar, Michel Foucault. So he told me that even though I studied about Malabar in Kerala, I used Michel Foucault's framework. Then he told me during the pre-submission that Foucault is limiting your thesis, Chitran, like he told me. So that was like a brilliant criticism, I would say, a very constructive kind of criticism, which is still there in my mind and which actually influenced me. So in fact, the theory that you are using shouldn't limit your thesis, shouldn't limit what you want to say, actually. So in that sense, but here I'm mentioned because it's being considered that, you know, theory is very much connected to method. Like, so in that sense, you know, there is this deductive and inductive thinking, which most of you might be aware of. When you prepare for net exam and all, you write that. So from the general to the particular, right? So that is the idea of deductive thinking, which was articulated by the ancient philosopher Plato. So there is this theory, the overarching theory that is there, and I will demonstrate it through some examples. Can you move ahead to the next slide? Yeah, sure. Yeah, so these are like certain things. So theory is the topmost portion of the building. So you can imagine that it's like a building. So theory is the topmost portion of the building. Then concepts, indicators, variables, values. So values are the foundation. Basically, your primary data, the flesh of your research are in the values. So you are measuring those values and you are building up your thesis one by one. Can you go to the next slide? That will give a much more clearer picture of this. I've demonstrated it through an example. So this is also reference from the book, from a book. I will tell the reference books later. So basically, this is the thing. I mean, theory. So there is a theory like poverty leads to poor health. You know, a theory is there. Poverty leads to poor health. Right? Then there is something called concept. Concepts are poverty and poor health. These are concepts. Theory is like poverty leads to poor health. Somebody might have told poverty leads to poor health. And maybe you are going to Dharavi, the slum in Mumbai, to measure how poverty leads to poor health. And you're using a theory from some scholar who worked, and you're applying it here. And you're using the concepts of poverty and poor health. And then you go to indicators. So indicators are like low income, poor living conditions, restricted diet. Right? So these are like manifestations. They are visible in some ways or the other. Poverty leads to poor health is not visible to you. I mean, it's an abstract thing, something that is there in the sky, or like somebody is proposing something. It is not established, right? Poverty, and so they are larger concepts. But low income, poor living conditions, restricted diet are somewhat visible, not fully visible, somewhat visible. Then you go to variables, levels of overcrowding, right? Provision of sanitary facilities, infestations of vermin, like some epidemic diseases, the levels of garbage that is being piled up, right? So these are like visible things. You can see it on the ground, right? So these are the visible evidences or manifestations of poverty, right? And also poor health. And then you are going to values, more specific, that you are measuring. You are going to the field, you are measuring, okay, there is overcrowding in Dharavi. So the number of people in a room are maybe, 20 people or something. I'm just giving you a rough example, right? So you are constructing values, and you are observing the values, right? So in that sense, this is a very interesting example I got from a reference book, so that it can be very clear to the audience, I hope. So this is how you build understanding. So values are more visible. Theory and concepts, they are the abstract things, which you arrive at after. It can be either ways, so this is like a deductive method. You are starting from the top, abstract, right? And then you are coming down, you're going to the field in Dharavi, and you're observing this, and you're saying that this theory is correct. But then you can even question the theory. That theory, poverty leads to poor health, didn't address the caste and community component. So then you are finding out what all castes and communities are suffering from this thing. So you're making your intervention. This is called deductive. So you're deducing. Inductive is just the other way. So reverse. You go to the field first. You don't have any theoretical background, nothing. You go to the field, you go to Dharavi. Then you see these problems, and you're building up one by one. and you're arriving at a theory, right? So I thought there's a better way to explain about deductive and inductive thinking research, which we do during, it's part of method also. The way we do method also is connected to this. So can you go to the next slide? So yeah, this is inductive thinking. So inductive thinking is the other way. You are starting from the ground. You are investigating the levels of overcrowding, maybe garbage piled up, and then you are developing on this theory that poverty leads to poor health. So in that sense, so I would say that theory is not like very mandatory, but from my experience, I'm telling that it's better to have a conceptual concept is somewhat very important. So this is what I also observe from my work. You don't have to reach to a theoretical statement, or you don't have to use a theory, but then it's always important to use certain concepts. Like for instance, poverty, poor health. I am using the concept of violence in an article that I'm developing. Violence, how I'm not using theory much, but I'm like having a conceptual understanding of violence, how the colonial criminal law is very violent when it comes to marginalized castes and communities, right? So concept, my suggestion is that when you do research, you should have a conceptual clarity. That is somewhat very important, not necessarily a theoretical understanding. I think the slide had disappeared. Yeah, no problem, no problem. Take your time. Thank you. So in that sense, that is very, very important. Yes. So I think we reach the next slide, right? Yeah. Okay. So case study. So case study is also something very important, because I think every one of us, because we talk about narrowing down your research. No, research is all about narrowing down your topic, your location, and even your area. So generally we do case study based approach, case study based research. You take a region, right? So these are some of the important things. It's not necessary that you need to have all these things for case study based research. This is also from a reference book that I got, that documentation, archival records, interviews, direct observations, participant observation, physical artifacts. So interviews, direct observation is more like you're going there on the field, and you may have an equipment like a camera or a tape recorder, and you do interview, you observe. It can be like a photograph, like what Sujit sir and Dr. Jabir had spoken about, visual history or visual landscape. You are fetching through photographs and camera. So these are like observation. Participant observation means you are actually you are also an agent. Like for instance, you are working on some festival ritual, and you are participating in that ritual. Through participation, you're observing that ritual, you are analyzing that ritual, like that. Physical artifacts are more like material objects that are there. So this is from a reference book that I got. It's not necessary that you should have all these understandings when you do research. So can you go to the next slide, please? So case study is more like, we all do case studies, case study based research, especially in South Asia. And when you do a case study, the most important thing that you need to do is how your region is somewhat different from when you base your research on a particular region, how your region is different from the other regions. This is something quite challenging also, because you need to know the specialty when you do the research, how it is different from other regions, right? That is also very important. How differently are you arguing when it comes to your region? This is very tricky also. Even I myself struggle a lot when this comparison thing happens, because many people might have worked on, like for instance, my topic, criminal law, but then how is my region different from other regions when it comes to the aspect of criminal law? It is not mandatory, but then it would be better if you are able to highlight the speciality, what is different from the other regions when you do this case study based research. And of course, theoretical framework, it's not very mandatory to have a theoretical framework. Again, it depends on the nature of your work that you are doing, the idea of theoretical framework. But more specifically, I need to discuss about three aspects which are somewhat important: exploratory, explanatory, and descriptive case study. So can you move to the next slide? There is a visual representation of that. So exploratory case study is more like what you call as inductive. That is, you are exploring something new. For instance, I can tell one example. History of childhood. Like I'm come from history background, that's why I'm saying history of childhood. Very few people have worked on childhood, right? History of orphanages. Very few people have worked on history of orphanages, history of orphans. There have been very few works on that. So sometimes your work would be very new, that nobody has worked on that. There is no theory, or like there might be a theoretical framework, but then you are the first person to work on a particular topic, or not very major works have happened in that area. So that is like exploratory. You are exploring something new, right? So in that sense, it's like an inductive approach because you don't have any theory and all. Like for instance, childhood. Very few people have worked on the history of childhood, history of orphanage, history of orphans. Very few people have worked. So in that sense, you are actually starting something new through exploration. It is more flexible. There is no barrier of using theory, right? So in that sense, that is like exploratory case study. Explanatory case study is different. There it's more like deductive, where you're using theories and then trying to build upon a work or a case study or a topic, right? So that is the exploratory case study. And descriptive case study is more like detail, like you are actually, you have so much of rich data related to that. It might be a worked topic, like it might have been worked by many scholars, but then you are detailing it with so much data, so much content, so much new content may be related to that area. And it's not necessary that you should have a theoretical, background when you write a descriptive case study. So these are like various case studies that are there, and it depends on your topic that you're choosing, where you use, you choose which case study to take. So can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so these are like basic things, secondary data, primary data. You might be aware about that. Why I told you this, because many of you might be familiar with these things. But then I thought that, these are very fundamental things when you reach the idea of method, right? Because this is the introduction to the idea of research method. So secondary data, of course, many of you know that books, articles, but newspapers sometimes we use as primary data also. But then old newspapers and all we use as primary data. But then magazines, documentaries, journal articles, and this idea that is connected to literature review, in fact, where you are interpreting, and interpretation and analysis. These two are very, very important things when you do research, and it's connected to methods only. That you are interpreting it and you are analyzing it. I told you about what is analysis and what is interpretation. And of course, no secondary work arises out of vacuum, because it's like you are also an agent. Like it's like a particular topic is there and many people have worked on that topic, and you are also intervening in that space as a researcher, right? And so that you should be very much aware about these things. So we discussed it as part of literature. You can go to the next slide. So primary data also will be there. So measurement, observation, it is connected to field-based study. So measurement, of course, is more like you're measuring. We discussed about, you are discussing about the number of people who are staying in Dharavi slum, right? Overcrowding. So this is like a measurement. You're going to the field and measuring. Okay, 20 people are being staying in one small congested room, right? I just gave an example. So here they have given various examples, voting polls, exam results, that is different thing. Observation, measurement, observation. Observation, I told you, you're going to the field, you're observing, you're capturing it, maybe through microphones. Again, the question of ethics, I'll come to that later. There's the question of ethics also that comes related to this. So observation is also one thing. Can you move to the next slide? Interrogation, yeah, interrogation is a very complex topic. That word also has some very problematic connotations. But then, in fact, I had derived from one reference book. So basically, questionnaires. So it's connected to sampling. You ask questions. That is another thing. Like you go to the field, you ask questions to the, the people whom you are researching about. So you prepare questionnaires, and it's connected to sampling methods and all, which we will touch upon. And participation, in fact, participant observant, like you are participating, you're becoming an agent. Like for instance, you are studying about a festival that is being celebrated by the slum dwellers in Dharavi, and you are participating, you are becoming an agent in that festival, and you are observing it. So there are various ways in which you are collecting the primary data, and you can move to the next slide. Yeah, this is something that is quite tricky, because as I told you, history, because I come from history background, I've never done this idea of sampling methods, because history, we go back to the past always. Of course, there is a possibility of doing sampling methods in history, but generally we don't do much, because we mostly go to the past. We consider the past documents. Now they talk about ethno history and all. This is a very deep topic. I'm not getting into that. But then subjects as sociology, anthropology, economics, and I think many of you in this audience also might be interested from those subjects. Then the sampling methods, and I have my own reservations about sampling methods as well, because these are like some conventional understandings about sampling methods which need not be true, which can even be challenged. So in fact, within the sampling method, so what is a sampling method? You are going to the field and you are seeing, you are creating certain samples, and based on those samples, you are actually, the samples can be human populations, and these are measurable things, and through that you are deriving some conclusion. So in fact, there is something called non-probability sampling method. So within that, so basically not, can you move to the next slide, please? That would be better. Yeah, I also used air tool here. So non-probability sampling is something like you are basing everything out of convenience, right? So this idea of bias in social science, that you have some bias, you have some leaning towards something or someone, that is a very tricky question, the idea of bias. But for the sake of this topic, I am presenting this. That is, everything in non-probability sampling is connected to certain form of bias. Like there is something called convenience sampling. Like here they have shown an example, reaching accessible students, quick and low cost. So the researcher is thinking that he or she or they might have some known person in a particular school, and you're talking about I'm just giving an example, the workload, the pressure that the students are facing in examination. Maybe you're doing a study like that, and you are familiar with some school, right? Some of your friends might be working in a school, and through that friend you are getting access to the samples, and you yourself are picking the people whom you want to study, right? So when you do research, when you go to the field, you have to engage with the people, right? So here you are the agent who are choosing the people whom you want to study. Like for instance, when you go to Dharavi slum and you know the people there, the people there, you're familiar with the people there, and you are working on those people, right? So Vidushi, for a moment, can I just just a moment, can I hide my video? I'll just come back within 1-2 seconds, just for keeping it on charge. Okay. Okay, so thank you so much. So basically, this idea of sampling, non-probability sampling, is related to your familiarity with the field. So in fact, this is a very conventional understanding that when you do non-probability sampling, there are high chances of bias because you know the people on the field. So you will be automatically, the way you select the people whom you are interviewing, that means that you have certain bias. It's not that they are unknown people to you, right? But this idea of bias is also something very complex, which we will discuss, and that is the idea of convenience sampling. That people on the field whom you are researching are very much accessible to you, right? And most similar or dissimilar cases. So this is another form of sampling that is there, that you are maybe comparing the cities. That's what the example they have mentioned. The similarities, like for instance, Mohali and Singapore. Like Mohali is considered to be a very planned city, and Singapore is also considered to be a very planned city. So then you are comparing, you're taking similarities, and then you are maybe talking about the urban planning. And you may be taking two dissimilar things, like maybe you take Bangalore and Mohali. Bangalore is considered to be very overcrowded city, and Mohali is considered to be very planned city. So then you are understanding the planning and the city composition, the urban population, etc. But these are like known things to you. Basically, that's the idea of non-probability sampling, that it is out of convenience that you are choosing. Everything is based on convenience, that you are choosing your field, right? And then there are typical cases. So these are like very technical aspects, typical cases, that you are taking an average. Like for instance, it can be like the family size. So basically you're basing your work on certain averages. So going into the specifics would be a bit complicated, but in a nutshell, what I would say is that it is based on convenience, access, which may lead to bias, this non-probability sampling, right? And critical cases also is connected to you're using theory on a field, and if it works there, you're assuming that everything everywhere it works. So you're taking a field and you're putting that, like for instance, poverty leads to poor health is a theory, and you're using it in Dharavi, and you're assuming that okay, it can be applied everywhere else. So I'm just giving an example. So in that sense, non-probability sampling is more like connected to the convenience aspect, which may lead to bias. That is what the many of the people who worked on this are telling, about which I also have certain reservations. So you can move to the next slide.
Hi, Chitran. Sorry,
Yes,
you have another 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay, sure. I'll wind up soon. It will end soon.
Thank you.
So this is, snowball sampling and quota sampling. So snowball sampling is connected to, everything is based on your known connections. Like here also snowball sampling, there's an individual, who, you're working on a community, and there's an individual, and through that individual, you are getting connection to some other individuals, and from those individuals you are connecting to a larger set of individuals or a community. So everything is like through your connections, right? And then quota sampling also is there, which is like based on ratio, 60%. So it's a bit complicated things, but then it's all related to connections, and they say that it's related to bias. So you can go to the next slide. I think that would be better. Yeah, then there is that is non-probability sampling. Probability sampling is just the opposite of that. That everything is based on luck. Everything is like random. The people whom you are consulting on the field may not be the ones whom you know, or may not be the ones whom like you have access to. It is like lottery method, we call like lottery method, right? So these are the four types: simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling. You can go to the next slide. Yes, simple random sampling is more like, there are 100 people, out of which you are taking 50 people. So in those 100 people whom you don't know, those 50 people can be from anyone among those 100 that is being selected. It's like a lottery method, we call it. It's mentioned lottery method. So it's out of luck that you do, because I will come to one point after this, very significant point connected to this. So this is simple random sampling. Systematic sampling is more like ratio wise. Like out of 100, you may need to take 10 people, and then you go like 1 to 10, the 10th person, 10 to 20, the 20th person. So you likewise divide the people and take random samples whom you may not know. In the earlier case, it was about known people. So here they say that the chances of bias are very less. And then there is stratified sampling, that you are dividing the population into different strata or groups, and you're studying those groups. And these are like unknown people whom you don't have access. And that's how you do the research. And cluster sampling, it's based on the region, right? You are dividing it into, a big, like for instance, like a state of Bangalore, you are dividing it into various localities, and based on those localities you are doing the research, right? These are like unknown factors, unknown agents on the field, and you're doing research, right? So here they say that there are the chances of bias are less, because you don't know the people on the field. It's not through easy access that you're doing this research, right? So that's the difference, a very conventional way in which some scholars have argued about a non-probability and probability sampling. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So as I have 10 minutes, I'll go fast. If you have any questions, please raise during the question answer session. Interdisciplinary method. So we discussed about the sampling methods that are there. So interdisciplinary method. So in fact, I got from a reference book that interdisciplinarity is like a very interesting topic for me, in fact, because as a historian, I borrow, like for instance, I worked on colonial criminal law. I had borrowed certain aspects from sociology. Like, for instance, caste is something that is being studied in sociology very extensively. So, as a historian, I actually borrowed some ideas of caste from the discipline of sociology. I used it as a method in my research. So, interdisciplinary method is something that is used by scholars across the globe. And in fact, I got an analogy like social sciences are like an archipelago. So, what is an archipelago? So archipelago is more like a collection of different islands, right? Can you move to the next slide? So it is also AI generated. The next slide. Yes. So it is like this concept, where the social sciences is like an archipelago where there are multiple islands. Like there is sociology, there is anthropology, economics, political science, history, linguistics, geography, psychology. And you're creating bridges across these disciplines and you're traveling across these disciplines. Like, for instance, I'm from history background. So I want to know about society, like because caste is very much connected to society. So I'm taking a road, right? I'm taking this road to sociology and studying about society. So it is like an archipelago, like a collection of islands with connecting bridges. Right? So we can use that kind of method also in social sciences very well. I would say that this is a very interesting topic for me. Sampling is, of course, not very much interesting for me in that sense because I've never done sampling in my research. So it might have felt a bit blunt, but then this one I like a bit more because it's kind of a very creative concept of borrowing and using that methodology from other disciplines. That sociological method you are using in your historical study, right? Even something called ethnohistory is there. It's very important. Like nowadays, it's becoming very common that you use, it's not like conventional sampling methods, but you go to the field and you observe like the present people, and through the present, you are going to the past, right? So in that sense, this is a thing that I just wanted to tell you, interdisciplinary method. So you can move to the next slide. Archival method. So this is where I'm much more confident as a research scholar because I've done my research on archival history. Archives were my primary source as a history, person. And herein only I have some criticism towards the conventional understandings of sampling. So this idea of bias, the ones I presented about sampling, it felt like, these are like very conventional understandings, random sampling, this sampling, non-probability, probability. But then, as I told you, we always need to question things. It's not that these are like fixed things, right? I mean, when it comes to non-probability sampling, it says that bias. Like for instance, like I can tell about my supervisor, Professor Bangya Bukya. He actually worked on his own community for his PhD, right? He worked on his own community for his PhD. So if you say that, then it can be considered like a kind of biased kind of study. I mean, in that sense, if you say from the aspect of non-probability sampling, it can be called biased. But then, that idea of bias will be there. That bias is like a very tricky thing. And you are representing your community by doing that work. So I have certain reservations about the way these sampling methods are like considered like this is the perfect one. You can't question it. Bias is very problematic. I don't want to call it bias, but it's more like I told about my supervisor's research area because he worked on his community. But then it is more about, I think history writing, social science writing is more political, I would say, because these sampling methods and all, like the way I told it, it's like very reductive. But then it's very political. That is my opinion. Social science research, when you think very deeply, it's very political. It is not just limited to this sampling, that sampling. Of course, they are important methods, but then you also need to intervene in your own way. It's not like, okay, these are given things, so so there might be a potential bias, so I will do probability sampling. Don't do like that. I mean, don't get driven by these confines of, okay, I should go like this, I should go by non-probabilities, I should go by probability sampling because there is no bias. Bias is not a big problem according to me, because history is very subjective, or any other social science discipline is subjective. You are actually taking up issues and you are intervening in your own way, and your politics matter when you do research in social science. It matters significantly. So in that sense, that is where archival research is much more complex, because you are, what I did for my research is that you have archival documents and you are critiquing the archives, you are questioning the archives. Because archives, it's written by the colonial state, and colonial state will write from the position of power. They will write from a position of power. They won't write from a position of humanitarianism. So they will write from a position of power. So you are critiquing, you are criticizing that content in the archives. Maybe you are critiquing the archiving process itself, right? Why certain communities are not, voices are not visible in the archives, right? Why only certain communities voices are visible in the archives? So you are criticizing the whole concept of archiving. So in that sense, I think archiving gave me being critical towards, and it's not just archives. Even if you go for sampling methods, I think you should have a critical lens. You should have your own political position, and you shouldn't take it for granted whatever is there on the field. You should apply your subjective position as a researcher, and of course analysis and interpretation, and of course existing literature, concepts and all are related to archival method also. So you can move to the next slide. So I will be finishing soon. It's connected to ethics. Yes, ethics of course is like connected to all these things, because it's connected to your politics, you're connected to your social position, your cultural position, your gender position, your sexual orientation. Everything is connected to ethics, the research on the field, like how you understand like for instance, I told you I come from a privileged community, and I worked on the understandings of caste and community. Obviously there will be biases in the sense my cultural, my social, my political position. Even though I am also unlearning so many things, some of my conditioning also might reflect on the research that I am doing. Uh, a person who is coming from that community, when that person, whether he or she or they are working on their own community, like what my supervisor did, it would be more legitimate and more it would be more legitimate, more justifiable, because you have something called experience, right? And that is what these sampling methods, very conventional understandings, they don't address the side of experience is connected to the ethical position you are taking, right? So I don't have the experience of a marginalized caste person, but I'm working on this issue. So, in fact, it's a very challenging enterprise. We need to constantly unlearn so many things, acknowledge your problems, because when I'm doing the research, I should acknowledge my position, and I should acknowledge my problems also. I should accept the criticisms that might be coming from a Bahujan perspective about this work, right? So, ethics is something very important in research. You should be able to understand your position and your social position. Does the researcher have the experience of the research on the field? And that is what we do when we do these sampling methods. We go to the field, we may be doing questionnaire. So just like that, randomly, if I'm working on Dharavi, I'm going there, suddenly I'm just interviewing the people, like what is your age, what is your income. That is not the right way. So in fact, that idea of positionality is very, very important. So social science research is much more complex. The methods in social science research is much more complex. Why I told about those sampling methods is because this has been addressed by many scholars, and I thought it should be kind of delivered and there might be problems in the way I presented regarding that because I'm not well acquainted with that aspect. But then I thought, in a nutshell, I should present that. And if you have any, points to tell me, I can also learn because it's not like I am expert on sampling methods. Archives is something that I'm very confident about. So in that sense, I think I will end it. So can you move to the next slide? These are some of the references that I need to acknowledge. I've cited some references also. These are some of the basic books which I consulted as part of this presentation. So all are related to, basic methods, basic research methods, introduction, to social science research methods. So if you want, you can take a photo of it. Any participants, it might be helpful for you because I had completed my PhD. So you people might be starting your research. So it will be beneficial for you in that way, I guess. So yeah, thank you for the time. I hope it made sense. And if there were any problems, please raise it. And you know, yes, I
Yeah.
think Sharayu,
Thank
I
you.
guess.
Thank you
Yes,
so much,
it's raised
Chitran, for this
hands. Thank you so
clear,
much,
sharp, and creative
yeah.
presentation. It was
Thank you
really
so
nice.
much.
Now we are open for the question answer. All the participants, you can ask questions. Either you can directly write it to the chat box
I hope I'll be
or
able
just
to do
raise your hand.
justice.
Okay,
Yes.
so I think Sharia. Yes, Sharia,
Yeah, Sharayu.
ask your question.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable, just you can switch on your camera and ask directly.
Yes, whatever it is. Yeah. Be
It's
comfortable in
perfectly
your
all
own
right.
way.
It could be a one-to-one interaction. I should not
Yes,
come in
yes,
between.
yes.
Please ask your question. Sharia.
Yes. Hi, Chitran. This was
Hello, hello.
actually amazing, amazing. At the point
Thank
where
you.
I am right now, I come from
Okay.
the background of architectural history. I am trained as
Okay,
an
okay.
architect and later in architectural history. And
Okay.
my life course was such that, through working with the Adivasis in Nepal and India, and understanding, natural resources like ponds, which are also very cultural,
Yes.
and architectural, in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? They are part of a landscape. And so I
Mm-hmm.
got invested in that, and ever since, I switched my professional hat from
Okay.
being trained as as a historian and an architect to
Right.
social sector, to actually being on
Mm-hmm.
the ground and participating and
Yes,
bringing
yes,
some
yes, yes.
change. And that has caused me a lot of trauma because as a researcher
Mm.
you're so used to looking at nuances and not sort
Yes,
of
yes,
glossing over them, and
yes,
stuff
yes,
like
yes.
that. And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
during this experience I had
Mm.
the chance of living in
Mm.
Kumbhalgarh, which is in Rajasthan,
Mm.
and
Okay.
working with the nomadic communities,
Okay.
and documenting, I mean, in social
Okay.
welfare. And
Okay.
now
Okay.
that I'm looking at my own practice, I am wanting to
Mm-hmm.
go back and do a
Okay.
PhD. And that
Okay.
is where even my question that I typed out in the
Okay.
chat, which is,
Okay. Okay.
okay, what is the formula for a research question then? Because I am
Ah.
fighting with this thing, because
Mm.
having lived in that landscape for
Yes.
almost a year and a half, with a
Right.
job and then later without a job, because the people gave
Mm-hmm.
me a house, and the idea of house also,
Mm-hmm.
right? Living with the
Mm-hmm.
nomadic communities. And now I
Mm-hmm.
am wanting to understand, what is
Mm-hmm.
architectural history really, and
Okay.
what or how can we reimagine that stuff. And there are so many different
Mm-hmm.
examples and observations, and that
Mm-hmm.
I am just my neurodivergent brain is just
Mm-hmm.
dancing all over the place since such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so
Yeah.
with and ethics, right? The thing
Right.
that you were talking about, ethics
Right.
and
Right. Right.
convenience. I mean, it felt like a very personal attack when you were talking and
No,
addressing all these
never.
different things. So,
never. Yeah.
so the point is, like, the question that I
Yeah.
had was,
Yeah.
how do we then narrow down,
Mm-hmm.
our field, considering that
Mm-hmm.
everything bleeds into one another? And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I particularly face this because so much of the concepts that I'm trying to develop,
Mm-hmm.
and talk to people, they say, oh, this is anthropology, oh, this is the,
Yeah.
and but I mean, also the people that I'm working with, right, they come
Right.
from a particular background which I am not a
Right.
part of, right, by
Right.
birth or by default, but my close
Right.
engagement with them. And as you
Right.
said, even the feel, like, why I mean, I
Yes.
would have, like, 10 different reasons to justify that, but like,
Mm-hmm.
how I still feel like, this complex, what do you call it, the
Mm-hmm.
imposter syndrome, like, where
Mm-hmm.
you almost have it but you're not able to articulate, or you're not able to
Mm-hmm.
refine, like,
Yes.
what
Yes. Yes.
exactly,
Yes.
because
Yes.
there's so much of discourse around these things. So how do you actually narrow down, like, is there a formula, is there a
Mm-hmm.
method? Like, I don't know, I would have just bombarded you with a lot of
No, no,
information.
no,
But
no. Never, 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 never. So basically, thank you so much, Sharayu. It's like fascinating your observations and your work also. I would say, I mean, it's so rich and so nuanced, and the way you articulated it's so brilliant. So community history is again a very complex thing. In fact, I have never done a community based history because it's very tricky. But then what I understand is that in the last Kashf lecture also I had mentioned about this idea. I had happened to listen to, I don't know whether it will be connecting to your question, Urvashi Butalia. She had come to our university when I was in Hyderabad Central University, and she was speaking about her field experience. So she worked on the partition, victims of partition, and she was particularly speaking, and this lingers in me, that it happened. This lecture happened almost 2 years back, and the point that she emphasized still lingers in me actually, compared to, because it was like a lecture series that our social science organized. There were many lectures, and other lectures were all related to subject theory and all these things. But Urvashi Butalia's research was very much experiential, very much personal in that sense. So one thing, even in the last talk, also I highlighted that point, that of course the social and political position of the researcher matters, but she was speaking about a concept of camaraderie, which I don't know whether I'll be able to use in my research if I'm studying about community. But then the idea of camaraderie when you do research on the field. So she was particularly speaking about a trans woman who had experienced partition, the trauma of partition, and she comes. Her life experience is not that of a partition victim, or she herself had experienced partition, I think, Urvashi Butalia, but the class position, the caste position, and even the gender position is very, very different. And she was speaking about this trans person, and she's speaking about the idea of camaraderie, that it's not about, like I also mentioned during this presentation, the idea of researched, the researched on the field. But then you are developing a camaraderie with that person. It's not that you are seeing that person as another. So over a period of time, you are developing that camaraderie with that person on the field, and in that sense, you cannot, like, I mean, it's not that somebody from a different life experience shouldn't study about a community or a nomadic community. You spoke about nomadic community, or somebody who has a very different life experience is studying about a nomadic community. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, or obviously, we should have that, because I also come from a different background. But then it depends on the position. Like for instance, camaraderie is a very different kind of understanding, that you are cultivating that kind of friendship, that bonding. And of course,
right,
Urvashi Butalia is more like a independent researcher. She doesn't have, like, she's not bound by the confines of institution. And I think institution also plays a role in this, because where we are working, like for instance, when you're doing a research on,
right,
institutional constraints are very much there when we do this kind of field based research, right?
Right.
But then I think it's based on it's not like you shouldn't study. It's based on the that ethical and political position. Obviously, you can cultivate it through a process of unlearning. Your conditioning and all. I think.
Right. Can
Uh,
I just jump in and like just
sure,
add
sure, sure. I
add
know.
one more tiny thing? So
Yes.
because I come from an architectural background, right, which is very
Yes.
primarily material in that sense, right? It
Material.
is not very
Absolutely.
theoretical. And
Absolutely.
having this experience of worked in the field, with
Mm-hmm.
NGOs, on the
Mm-hmm.
ground, mobilizing people,
Mm-hmm.
even people with the community that I became friends with, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Okay.
we
Okay.
started organizing people and raising
Mm-hmm.
questions, issues in a very
Mm-hmm.
political sense also, right? Not in a very
Mm-hmm.
only observational sense. And
Yes.
now that I'm wanting to go back, to
Mm-hmm.
that experience, to developing
Mm-hmm.
a topic, developing a question, I am actually
Mm-hmm.
facing a lot of problem in with this idea of ethics, in the sense of what am I giving
Mm-hmm.
back, right? Like,
Okay.
of
Yeah, I
course,
understand. I
developing a
understand. I understand.
theory is one part of it, but like,
Yes. 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 I
am I
understand.
wanting to develop an archive? Like, in what sense is my
Mm-hmm.
research becoming a tool? Because that was the point, where I
Mm-hmm.
moved away from academia into the field,
Mm-hmm.
so that
Okay.
research can be used as a tool. So I am
Mm-hmm.
actually struggling with this idea, because there are so
Mm-hmm.
many interesting observations that might lose their nuances if I am
Yeah.
making it completely in a political, with a
Mm-hmm.
political edge, in the sense of, like
Yeah.
a tool, like,
Mm-hmm.
something which is materially giving back, because I come from the
Mm-hmm.
material field, right? So
Yes. Yes.
maybe
Yes.
that
Yes.
could
Yes.
be the bias and also my experience. So how do we deal with this idea of ethics
Mm-hmm.
in that sense, right? Like, is it
Right.
uh, I mean, I don't know. I just want to know your views. Like, can we imagine
Yeah.
both a theoretical, inductive method,
Mm-hmm.
in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, with
Mm-hmm.
an outcome based, very physical, sort of a thing?
Tangible kind of
Yeah, a
change.
very tangible thing, sort of
Mm-hmm.
a thing like that. I just want to
Mm.
know.
I totally understand your question. In fact, it's a very brilliant question in that sense because this idea of tangible change, that's what I understand what you mean. That you're using theory and how it is, how you're giving back to the community. See, this is also very complex question, which I don't know whether I'll be able to answer this because again, being a researcher also is challenging because I don't know whether it's to change the society or transform the society. I mean, research, whether it actually results in a tangible change, is something that we need to think about. But then I think we can make, certain steps where you can actually kind of get rid of that theoretical lens and maybe simplify. I don't know whether it makes sense in that way because there are many historians who are actually trying to write history in the vernacular, and vernacular is again a big topic of debate. That vernacular is something, the region languages, and again in language we need to have a separate lecture, the language politics. It can be made accessible to a larger audience. But then effecting a tangible change is something like we need to think deeply. We need to work at the policy level, you know. We need to influence the policy making in a direct way. And I think historians can do that. I don't know about your work, how it can be connected, but like for instance, I can tell from my work, if I can. Like, for instance, I work on criminal law, how it impacts marginalized castes and communities. So, in today's context, there are rising police atrocities on marginalized castes and communities in jails, within prisons, right? So, in that sense, if I go back to the past, actually, I have a deeper understanding. I can actually kind of become an agent in intervening myself within the governmental sphere in a much longer term. So I think we can do, as you said, you are an you did architectural history. You can actually intervene in the public sphere by connecting it to the present as an agent. And I think that is very important. And your intention matters, I think, your political intention, your cultural intention, the unlearning that you're doing, that matters, where you can intervene in the policy sphere, which can kind of create a space for change for the communities you are working on. I know it's a very challenging enterprise. Your question is very good. You're deep also. It gives lots of food for thought also. Because I think, thank you for raising that question, because I think, as social scientists, we need to seriously think about that. Effecting a policy change, making an intervention in the policy level. I think we are potentially enough to do that in that sense. And I guess, I don't know whether I answered your question.
Okay. Okay, we'll pick up the next question. Oh, Sharai,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I missed
Thank you,
one.
Sharai.
Next is Aditi, then Adil,
Okay.
then Sanatan. We have
In chat box?
Aditi.
Okay, Adil.
No,
Okay,
we'll ask Aditi.
Yeah.
Aditi, Adil, and Sanatan.
You can unmute yourself and
then
ask.
caller, next is called Aditi. Do you have any question? You raised your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, Adil.
Sanatan, Kajal, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions.
Adil.
Yeah.
I'm audible, sir.
Yes,
Am I audible?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, you are audible.
Yeah. Sir, my question has already addressed by... Hello, sir.
Please,
Am I audible?
Yeah, please tell.
Sir, it talks about the positionality is much more matters in the social science research. As
Yes.
Surya, sir, I also address these questions. Sir, my work is based on the Dalit musical forms from the representational politics. Okay. I don't have any research experience also. I am fast learners like that. Okay. In that sense, if I will go to the village and interact with the peoples or village folk, right?
Yes.
Okay. In that sense, in what way I extract the objective data from the fields, basically in social sciences.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Sanatan. That's a very interesting question. It's connected to, I think, the previous question also about a very interesting topic, by the way, Dalit musical forms, actually. See, Sanatan, the thing is, what I understand is that, when you go to the field, again, it's like the idea of acknowledging yourself, whether you have the lived experience or you don't have the lived experience. And I'm not someone, actually, in my MPhil, when I did MPhil, I had done a bit of fieldwork research. It was not connected to the topic that I'm doing now. So there I had worked on a ritual performance. It's like somewhat connected to the musical dimension also, which is actually performed by Dalit communities in the northern part of Kerala. I was particularly trying to examine how the Muslim community is getting represented in these dance forms. It's called Teyyam. It's a ritual and it's an art form. So I had done some interviews, and during that time I was very young, I was very naive, and I also didn't have a proper methodology. I just went to the field. I spoke with the people. Now, if I'm retrospectively thinking that, I feel that I did lots of blunder, because there was no training. Actually, I myself was not that much kind of matured, and I got carried away by that topic. And I went to the field. I asked questions. I kind of was part of that ritual. But then, getting information, again, objectivity, the question you asked, objective data, that's what I said. Objectivity is like a very contentious thing in social science. There is nothing like objectivity, I would say, in social science, because when you study about human beings are subjective. Human beings have emotions. Human beings are determined by, as I told, various social positionalities. So you can never extract like whatever we call objective data from the field. It's all experiential things that you can collect. But getting the data again, it's like very tricky. Like I answer, like how we interacted in the last question. It's the first thing that you need to know is you should acknowledge your positionality. I'm not saying that you shouldn't work on that. You should acknowledge your positionality, and when you go to the field again, it's very tricky. You can't suddenly go and interview the people there. In that sense, I think the idea of non-probability sampling, even though they say bias and all, non-probability sampling, I think, is much more interesting in that sense, because uh, leave the question of bias, but then accessibility is more important. That, like, for instance, you are genuinely interested to study about Dalit musical traditions. Obviously, to reach the people or the target audience, you need to have certain connections, which I didn't do during my MPhil. I must say, I just went to the field. It was more like a random kind of study I did, without any contacts, without knowing the landscape. I just went to the field. But the primary thing is that you should have that camaraderie. You should cultivate, you should bring them into confidence, whoever whom you are studying about. You should bring them into confidence. You should cultivate that camaraderie. And it can be, I think, this is my personal take, it can be attained through certain contacts, which you cultivate on the field, and you develop that comfort level. You be like, I mean, of course, it might sound like a bit patronizing what I'm saying, but then again, you cannot completely, do away with this kind of methodology. And again, your intention matters. Like in the previous question, it was very interesting, like how you are giving back to the society. It's not that you are doing something, like you can contribute in some way. It is not that you should completely avoid that community, exclude that community. That's what I personally, I feel that during my MPhil I didn't do justice when I did research, because I thought that when you go to the field, you should have like fair amount of preparation, fair amount of methodology, and that is why I told you should have you should cultivate the contacts, and through them, if you're able to get in touch with them, develop an idea of comfort and camaraderie. Rather than going and asking a question like in the form of a questionnaire, if you're able to have a free conversation and then developing rapport and then getting their experiences. It's not necessary that these answers should be, I mean, you should have a fixed set of questionnaires and go. Like that's what Urvashi Butale also did. Like she got the experiences. She herself was talking, and those experiences you are actually, cultivating into your research. I think, I don't know whether I made sense, Ananthan.
Yes, sir, I got.
If you
Devajyoti.
can
Next
mail me
question
also,
from
no problem.
Could I just add to that question, because you're studying Dalit music forms, would you want to check works in the field of ethnomusicology, because it's an up and coming field and you might relate to some of the methods being employed there? Could refer to works that are being used. So just a suggestion there.
Yes. Interesting topic, by the way. All the best for your research also. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Devajyoti, are you here?
Hi, Chitran. Thank you for such a very lucid and clear presentation. Hope you are doing well. So my question is
Devajyoti from HC, like IIT Bombay.
Yeah.
Okay, nice to hear you.
Yeah. So my question is about the archive, as I am from history and I am now trained.
Yeah, we know each other also very well.
Yeah. So you have talked about, you have spoken about the colonial archive, the art of power and the discourse and the knowledge production. So I was thinking about not the colonial archive, but the vernacular archives, the archives in the regions, the regional small archives, which can hold the collections of the documents, maybe in form of the periodical, maybe in form of the magazines. So we see the vernacular archives mainly sometimes as a challenge to the state narratives, as a challenge to the colonial archives. But I feel the vernacular archives hold such kind of the power also, because if you are seeing it from the perspective of the caste and the community, then the documents, the collections of the magazines you are finding in the vernacular archives, maybe from a community which is up in the society. and
Absolutely.
they are not, or they are sometimes the voices of the underrepresented communities are absent there. So
Absolutely.
I just want to know your thoughts, your experiences.
Absolutely.
You have trained as a historian, how to read the regional or the vernacular archives. Whether should we apply the methods of the colonial reading of the colonial archives to the vernacular archives, or there would be many other ways to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devajyoti. I'm very happy to hear your voice after a long time. Thank you for attending this, discussion also. Very interesting question. Vernacular archives, and of course, vernacular archives holds a power in itself. Obviously, your point is absolutely correct. I think you also might be consulting vernacular archives. In fact, I also did that. I mean, even though it is not like archive in the archive is also a very broad concept, right? There is this book called Unarchived Histories, edited volume. So archive is like a very broad concept. We only think about the government archive. In the PPT also it was mentioned, I think. The state archives, which is a center of power. But then archiving is like a very broader concept, right? You have archived chats, so in that sense, even a novel can be considered as an archive, in a broader sense, because I worked on novels in my thesis. One of the chapters was on novels, and it is a vernacular, archive. Archive in the sense I'm not speaking of the state archive, but the process of archiving, right? Uh, in fact, the written word, right? And not just novels, there might be like, even when I did my research, there were archival documents that were written in vernacular language, right? So these are also centers of power, and as you said, you see the voices of the dominant caste communities, you don't see the voices of the underprivileged or the marginalized communities. Because when I discuss about my work, I also have consulted certain vernacular archives where you see like certain bureaucrats who are like village bureaucrats, like tehsildar, then there are these village level bureaucrats like tehsildar, then there is sheristadar, gumasta. So they are like employees of the colonial state. And these employees will be mostly coming from the dominant caste. Like in my region, I've also worked upon that, the village bureaucracy, how they exerted power, how they exerted violence upon the marginalized communities, right? And in fact, I also, thank you for raising that question. I am also reading about violence. There is this book by Diana Heath called Colonial Terror, and Radha Kumar, who also worked upon the agents who are actually facilitating violence, and these agents who are facilitating violence are the dominant caste communities, and they will be the ones who will be writing the vernacular documents, because the British colonial state obviously don't know how to write regional language. So these agents, bureaucrats, who village level bureaucrats or village power holders are the ones who are writing these vernacular documents, and they are also becoming the agents of violence. So obviously you can apply, of course, the larger logic of power will be the logic of the colonial power. That's what Radha Kumar and Diana Heath has also worked upon. Their understanding is that it's colonial violence. Like the larger structure is the colonial state, which is, facilitating violence, engendering violence. But these are the agents, So they're also, their language will be very colonial. They're succumbing to the colonial violence, and their language will be very colonial, but it's written in a like vernacular, way, right? So in that sense, this is my take upon the vernacular archive. So I told about novels from a different perspective, because in novels also you see that second half of the 19th century, many of the dominant caste members are writing novels. Of course, there are certain novels in Kerala, like where I studied, about which I studied, which are written by the marginalized communities. But then in the novels written by the dominant caste, there is this frustration or the reform within caste that they want to make, that they're very much concerned about their caste based self, right? So that is being, proposed. So in that sense, you don't see, the voices of marginalized communities in those kind of novels. So in that sense, obviously, it is also a field of power which we need to take seriously, and there are influences of the colonial, power also within that domain, I think. I hope I answered your question, Devajyoti, and
thank you
so much.
Chitran, for the answer. Hoping to attend more of your session in future.
Yeah, thank you so much, Devajyoti, for attending.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chitran, we have two questions in chat box. One is by
Okay,
Niranjan, and he's asking,
I will read that.
storytelling recently has been emerging as
Storytelling
an
recently
important
has been
tool.
emerging as an important tool in research methods. How can it be used in studying tribals? Of course, storytelling is very good question, Niranjan. Very interesting question. Yes, of course, we need to diversify our methodology or methods. Storytelling, rumors, people study about rumors, the power of rumors, gossips, right? Many such methods can be used. And how can it be used in studying tribals? So that is quite tricky because this is also connected to oral history, what we had discussion, like how you interact with the communities. And again, don't aim for objectivity, because this is, my take, and I think, I hope everybody's take, like, there is nothing like objective. Even if you, because there is this thing, no, like, the written word is always the objective, that is a false notion. If you go to the colonial archives, it is not objective, it is biased, it has its own subjectivity, right? We can't think that, okay, the written word is the most authentic one and the spoken word is the unauthentic or the untrustworthy. So how can it be used to study the tribals? Again, that again depends on various contextual factors, like how we discussed in relation to the question of Sanatan about Dalit musicology, right? Again, it depends upon what stories you are taking, how those stories, like what kind of stories, where are you going to get these stories from, right? Whom are you interacting with? These kind of questions are very important. What kind of stories are there? What are these stories about? Is it about assertion? Like, for instance, I can tell about cinema as a source of not just history, like sociology. Like, for instance, I can talk about a director called Paranjit in Tamil. So he has directed some movies called Kala, it's a storytelling. It's not related to the question of Adivasis, but then it's a story, and it is directed by a filmmaker who is coming from that background. Or I don't know whether you have seen the movie called Tangalan, which is about the Dalit community in Tamil Nadu, Dalit community in Tamil Nadu, their history. This director called Pa Renjit is telling in the form of a story, right? So that is also history, So there is nothing like authentic, or he is telling his history of experience of oppression, marginalization, etc., in the form of cinema. So I think, again, how to study it again is a very larger question. It depends upon the context, the topic. Of course, stories can be incorporated, but then how you approach those stories are also important. The positionality, again, comes back to the question of positionality, acknowledging, your privilege, and all these things matter a lot, I think, when we integrate the idea of stories also. But then it's a very good question, I hope. Thank
Okay,
you,
Chitran.
Niranjan.
Quickly take this question from Sarayu in chat box,
Yeah,
then you
yes,
go ahead.
Prabhakar, can we just quickly take Kajal's question first, since Sharayu
Kajal,
has
yeah, please,
had a chance
Kajal,
to
yeah.
Kajal.
Yes,
ask
yes,
her
yes.
question? So if Kajal can quickly
Yes,
ask.
Hello, I hope I'm
yes,
audible.
Kajal.
So my question is, how does newspaper reports and magazines articles,
Yeah.
how much credibility they have in academic?
Yeah. Yes, good question. Newspapers and magazines. Again, the question of credibility is like a very tricky question that is connected to objectivity, because we always attribute credibility to the written word. Of course, that happens even as a researcher. I also do that. Like, okay, the archival source is the most credible source. So, credibility is like a very kind of a tricky question. As I told you, it's all about politics. You can consult any type of sources for that matter, be it oral sources, be it storytelling, be it newspapers, be it magazines. Of course, you can use newspapers and magazines, you can use novels, you can use sampling, you can use archival research, anything. But then how, as a researcher, you are approaching that source is very important. What is your position? Are you actually borrowing whatever is mentioned in the newspaper as such, Like, for instance, you might be working on Amrita Bazar Patrika, which was a very famous nationalist newspaper during the Indian national movement. But how are you approaching Amrita Bazar Patrika? Are you approaching it from a nationalistic perspective? Like, are you getting driven by the idea of nationalism and you are getting celebrated by the idea of nationalism and completely celebrating the Amrita Bazar Patrika narrative, or are you adding something new? Are you questioning the narrative of Amrita Bazar Patrika? For instance, you might be telling that you might be giving a hypothetical situation where this idea of caste or community is not being addressed. The voices of Dalits are not being addressed in Amrita Bazar Patrika. I'm just giving a proposition, right? Or for instance, Mohandas Gandhi also had written, Harijan and Young India. What was his position regarding caste? Very, very big question, right? You can't say that is 100% credible in that sense, right? In that way, you see Dr. Ambedkar's counter criticism towards Mohandas Gandhi, right? So again, credibility is like very tricky. It's about how you approach that source, whether it be newspaper or magazine, right? So that is my take. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Next question is by Sarayu in the chat box.
Yeah, does studying dominant voices in Adivasi do during archiving also through colonial framework? Okay. Uh, Studying dominant voices. I hope you mean the dominant voices within the Adivasi community, or
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I was
okay.
actually
Thank you.
joining in
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
just
That is
got
a very
mixed up.
interesting question. Yeah, in
Uh,
fact, yeah, please. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, because I mean, we were talking about two things and I had to ask and it all got mixed up. So, we were talking about this non-probability, right? This very
yes, yes, yes,
intimate
yes,
intimacy that you
yes,
have with the field.
yes, yes,
Let's
yes,
say
yes,
that I've lived in Kumbhalgarh for whatever reason, and then I
yes,
just
yes,
happened to stay there and
yes,
experience all that, and now I'm thinking about architecture
yes, yes,
and
yes,
also archives. We talked about vernacular archives, right?
yes,
So because my master's work did involve archiving those landscapes, ending up
right,
archiving those landscapes, and the with decolonial methodologies, right?
yeah,
How do you decolonize an archive and build something which is for the community, like ponds? And while I was collecting these stories, oral histories regarding these
yeah,
ponds, as well as I was documenting them, which I am planning to do even, with my work in Kumbhalgarh,
yeah,
certain men or, certain women in
mm,
power, I happen to acquire those stories from them. So even if I'm
mm,
saying that I'm working with indigenous communities,
yes, yes, yes,
building
yes,
decolonial archives of indigenous landscapes, which are on the verge of, disappearing, or maybe most
yes,
of them which have disappeared, I
mm,
realized that even these voices are in a
yeah,
somewhat dominant place or position
absolutely,
within the group. So,
absolutely,
like now, my hypersensitive mind just suddenly
mm,
switches to that frame that, okay, then
yeah,
who is not, and so the work that I have or the data that I have, I start questioning that as well. And then it ends up
right.
becoming literally nothing because I'm like really hypersensitive about power in that sense
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
ethics
I
also.
appreciate you that you are hypersensitive. I mean, that is what a social scientist must be having, I guess. And I hope we'll reach to that position. Uh, I totally appreciate in that way, because
Yeah.
that constant questioning, and your point is very important, because how to understand the idea of dominance within the community itself. It will be more
Yeah, yeah.
nuanced and like
And is that cheating? I mean, just getting away with it under this
yeah, yeah,
framework
yeah.
of, yes,
Yes,
indigenous
yes, yes,
archives
yes.
or decolonial methodologies, or yes, my
Yeah.
access is my privilege to the community.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that
Yes.
cheating, or how do you justify that? Like,
Mhm.
I mean,
No
I'm just trying to deal
access.
with that. Do you
Yeah.
study that through colonial framework? I mean, because
Ha.
decoloniality is, there's a critique that you also use the colonial framework to destabilize and not rethink. I mean, so I don't know. I just want to throw that
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
out to you, and
Right.
yeah, and
Yeah.
even
Again,
Vidushi or
colonial.
different people, if you have anything to contribute on.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting, because like which framework you approach, again, it depends upon what you're actually trying to do. Like, for instance, my study, I didn't go for a decolonial approach. I, even though I worked on community history during my MPhil, In my PhD level, I thought that I got a guidance from one of my external experts, Dr. Professor Anindita Mukhopadhyay. She told me that you should start with the archives because as a historian, you should actually start critiquing, you should understand the voice of power. Then actually thought that, okay, it can be a good starting point. Okay, let's understand how the power operates, to understand resistance. I thought, okay, let's understand how power operates. So from that quest, I had this, I consulted the archives, and it's not like a colonial approach, and it's not like decolonial also. It was more like, we say this term going against the grain of the archives, against the grain, like you are critiquing and you are actually, your political position is also influencing the way you are seeing the archives. So decolonial approach, see, again, it depends on, like, you can use whatever approach you want to when you study a particular community. You can see a particular community from the lens of the archives. For instance, I think it's my limitation also because in my work, I actually haven't gotten the real voices of the communities, like what you did. And that's why I say your work is very much amazing because you dealt with the communities, you worked with the communities, you understood their voices. In my thesis, the limitation is that I have not understood the voices of the communities because the perspective in which I was trying to see this phenomenon was, I kind of critique the perspective of power. I didn't look at the idea. Of course, even though I look at the idea of novel in my last chapter, the idea of fiction. So I have looked at certain novels written by some of the marginalized communities. They may not necessarily be Dalits, but then there is this toddy tapping community in Kerala, like you might be aware of Srinarayana Guru. So they were like somewhat, above, like in the sense they were somewhat dominant compared to the Dalits. But then there were certain novels which were written by these communities, which actually spoke in an emancipatory narrative, where there is a novel called Saraswati Vijayam, which speaks about, it's written by an advocate who came from the toddy tapping community. And the protagonist of that novel is actually a marginalized caste man who actually is a victim of violence from the dominant caste. And he escapes that violence, he converts to Christianity, he becomes a judge, and he is the same judge who is convicting the accused, like who inflicted violence on him, right? So there is this narrative of emancipation also, right? So in that sense, this voices can be like, there are voices like this also, which you can see. And there are this the voice of the state, which is kind of, which shows emancipation. Like we say, the colonial states policy was like carrot and stick. Like there is this benevolent face that they show, as well as the very violent face that they show. It's not about emancipation as such, right? So, but then that the idea of benevolence is there. Emancipation is a different usage altogether, right? So in that sense, the idea, the approach is like your own positionality, and being hypersensitive is absolutely fine. Like that should be the way a social scientist should be, I think, being hypersensitive. It might not lead to anywhere again. That's a very larger question, I guess, where we can have lots of discussion and all. I hope I answered, your question. I hope it made some sense.
I could just
Sharon.
contribute to that because I've just been recently reviewing a friend's to be submitted thesis. I could name her Sana. So I just want to say, because she works with archives, and one of the ways of reading, because we talk about reading against the grain, something
Yes.
that she has done with the novels that she studied for one of the chapters, is reading along the grain, but reading more close,
along the grain.
the same texts more closely, and they are and saying that there is no universal narrative that these texts also hold. There is no uniform narrative. There are fractures within the narrative. There are frictions within the narratives, and it's also important to attune yourself to those fractures and frictions.
Absolutely.
A, that's the one thing. B, because I also work My work is on Brahmin communities because I look at the dominant community, looking at how from a caste critical lens, I look at from that end. So something that I would want to say in that regard is also that when you are studying the indigenous voice, the dominant voice within the indigenous community, whether that is decolonial or not is something I cannot comment on, that because I do not work on decolonial methodology, so that I don't think I'm apt to answer that. But I definitely think that when you're writing, if you address that this is where my resources come from, my sources come from, and you do a critical reading of it from, it is indigenous, but it is also the dominant within the indigenous groups, and that voice and that story is important because that that sincerity and honesty of writing and research is important, and also the ways of reading it is important, the lens and how you are approaching it is important. So I think the level, I think I would tackle it in these ways, like reading along the grain, but reading for fractures and frictions, and then also saying that it's a voice of dominant within the indigenous, whether it is decolonial or not, that's for you to decide. I am not somebody who works on it, so can not say. But I can definitely say that it will be a like, I use a caste critical lens even if I'm studying a dominant community. Similarly, you could use a lens within Adivasi studies if there is whatever appropriate lens exists to approach these kind of narratives. Just that. Yeah.
I just want to add to Vidushi because she raised a very good point, which is connected to Sharayu's question also. Because even my supervisor, Professor Bangya Bukya, he works on the Lambada community and in Telangana and Deccan region. And in fact, he had contributed various articles on how within certain sections of Lambada community, there is this leaning towards, right-wing politics, the Hindutva politics, or how Hinduization is happening among the Lambada community. Right? They are considered to be a subaltern community, a marginalized community, and within that community, how this idea of kind of Brahmanical kind of approach is seeping even through their minds is something that he has addressed, and how it is impacting even electoral results. So in that sense, yes, absolutely, it will be very nuanced, and if you try to address the dominant voices, how domination exists within the community, within the marginalized community, is something that deserves deeper study. And I think mostly I've seen sociologists, who do these interventions, and that is how I think as historians also we need to learn it more, like that deeper sense of sociological understanding we need to have. And thank you for raising that question, actually, and thank you for sharing that insight, actually. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do we have any more questions?
I think we can wrap up. It's been a really long discussion, and it
was very fascinating, I must say. I mean, thank you for your time, because I know that you people have so much of other schedules and priorities, and you're prioritizing for me. That itself means a lot to me, actually.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chitran, for sharing your time, efforts, and valuable insight. Thank you, everybody.